lives, real people with families, and that there is never an excuse for violence. No matter what is said, violence is never the answer.
You touched on another point, a conundrum, if you like, these competing interests of freedom of speech and also the problems that are associated with social media and the ability to spread messages around the world instantaneously, which have sparked those riots. Could you comment on that and how we, in a free world, deal with that sort of issue?
I think we'd all say we don't want to see anybody engage in incitement to hatred, and in Australia, of course, we've got laws to deal with these issues, and I believe that they are appropriate laws. But living in the world we live in today, it's well and truly possible for something to get rapid dissemination around the world, coming from somewhere where there are no laws for dealing with racial vilification or incitement to hatred, and the content be around the world almost instantaneously. The technology makes that possible. What guards reactions, though, is how human beings choose to react. And I think the point that President Obama was making very strongly, and one I very strongly believe in too, is that there is never appropriate to react with violence. I think the President made this comment today that you can engage in more speech if something has deeply offended you, not violence.
Just on the meetings with the leaders today, do you get the sense that they can still be swayed on the UN Security Council vote, or do you get the sense that positions are now locked in with it being so close?
I think, like any election in any field, there are a range of people who make up their mind very early. There are a range of people who make up their mind closer in, and there are some who don't make up their mind until they're actually putting the pen to the paper. That's true in our own domestic elections. I think that will be true of the Security Council bid as well.
Might that actually be in Australia's favour?
Well, I think all of the voting procedures are really a matter for the UN.
Allocated in terms of what this has cost. $24 million allocated, but there must be a figure on what's actually being spent towards this bid. What is the figure of what has been spent? And if there is no figure, how do the Australian people work out if it's value for money?
Well, I think from a common sense perspective, you would understand. I mean, if we have an ambassador in a particular nation who's doing his or her routine work, and then we ask them as well to commence lobbying for our bid for the Security Council, that becomes part of their day-to-day work. Now, we would have had the ambassador in that location anyway. We would have been paying his or her salary anyway. We would have been paying for the rest of the people who are in the diplomatic mission anyway, but we've asked them to take on a particular task. That's why I'm using the terminology what has been directly appropriated as to what has been absorbed into the ordinary workings of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Well, I think Australians can look at what's been specifically appropriated, because we would have devoted the rest of the money to our foreign affairs engagement in any event.
Lindsay Tanner's re-emerged in today's papers saying, it's probably not a surprise to you, but saying that he didn't think Kevin Rudd should have been knocked off. And in a separate essay, he's also decried the state of the Labor Party, saying it's lost its purpose. It's motivated by political expediency rather than, inner belief. Do you have any views on that?
I can be very clear about the government's purpose, and the government's purpose is to keep the economy strong, to make sure that not only today but tomorrow Australians have got the best of opportunities and we maximise our prosperity as our region changes, and then we find a way to share that is fair and meets the needs of the Australian people, which is why you've seen us in the last few months, and you'll continue to see us as a government, very focused on delivering better schools, very focused on delivering better dental care, and very focused on delivering a national disability insurance scheme, all great Labor reforms.
Of Bank of Japan policy, speaking of the dollar and prosperity in the region, come up in your discussions with Mr.
I didn't hear
Noda,
the first few words.
the subject of Bank of Japan policy, quantitative easing, and its impact on our dollar. And
no, we didn't have a discussion about quantitative easing.
And can I ask, your government is in the courts this week seeking documents from the Australian Financial Review. Can you tell us why it feels necessary to do that? And given the history of the Labor government's commitment to FOI and the subsequent perhaps failure to deliver on some of those promises of openness, would it not be good for a court to decide on the scope of redactions from FOI documents?
Oh, look, we have strengthened FOI legislation. The matter involving the Financial Review is a very particular issue, turning on its own facts, and it's being dealt with by the Minister for Climate Change.
The other issue that the President raised this morning was the issue of Iran. Some people were expecting
The issue of
Iran. Some people were expecting some stronger statements. They can understand why in the midst of an election campaign he wouldn't. But do you agree with his sentiment that the time is running out for Iran, or would you like to see tougher action more immediately?
Look, what President Obama said this morning was that there is still time and space for diplomatic action to do its work, and I agree with that. We have a sanctions regime against Iran. We think there is still time for diplomacy to make a difference.
Tomorrow you're going to stand up and tell the UN General Assembly, in part, making your case for the Security Council. Could you tell Mr. and Mrs. Average in Australia why we should get a seat on the Security Council?
Well,
in their language, why is it?
Well, I'll do my best, Phil, having been set a challenge in very particular terms. The UN Security Council is at the core of the work that the UN does. When there are big and difficult issues in our world, it's the UN Security Council that comes into play to try and fix them. We're a nation that's got an interest in peace and stability in our region and around the world. In an interconnected world, you can't draw a boundary and say that's us and nothing that happens beyond the boundary matters. Things that happen around the world matter to us. And so we've had Australian lives taken by terrorists. So prescribing terrorist organisations matters to us. That happens at the UN Security Council. Missions in order to go to nations to deal with security issues come from the UN Security Council. Difficult questions like the question of Syria are things that should be dealt with at the UN Security Council. Sometimes they can seem a long way from our shores, but in a modern, globalised world, things that can seem a long way from your shores can still affect you. Global terror is a very good example of that. It was a stomach bug of some indeterminate origin. All I can tell you is one other person on the travelling party got struck down by the same thing. So we don't quite know whether that means we ate something the same or whether it's a virus, but I'm all right now. Thanks very much. That's the